There's a phase the empath always passes through before what others call their best chapter begins. It does not look like progress. It looks from the inside like collapse. The old fluency is gone. The old reflexes do not arrive. The hallway you used to walk through, the one between yourself and other people, no longer opens at your approach. You recognize this, the version of you that translated, absorbed, softened, returned, and arrived just in time has stopped reporting. What stands here now is not the empath others knew. It is not yet the one who comes after. This is what always happens. Not because something is broken, because the chapter cannot begin until the chapter that was running has actually closed. And no one tells you about this corridor. It begins quietly somewhere inside the body before anyone in your life notices. A small refusal, a delay between what is asked of you and what arrives in response. There used to be no delay at all. The request entered and the answer was already on its way out, already shaped, already accommodating, already adjusting to the temperature of the room. Now the request enters and there is a pause, and the pause is not deliberate. It is something more accurate than deliberation. It is what remains still when the part of you that used to leap forward has stopped leaping. You may try at first to summon the old reflex. The summoning does not work. The reflex does not come because the structure that produced it is no longer in service. The empathic readiness, the readiness that made you so legible, so reachable, so dependable has gone quiet, not tapped, not destroyed. Quiet in the way a long-running engine becomes quiet when it has finally been turned off. Those around you do not yet know this has happened. They are still speaking to the old listener. They use the old expectations, the old tones, the old shorthand that worked between them and you for years. And from the outside, very little has changed. You are still here. Why? Our face is still your face. Your name is still answered when it is called. But there is no longer the second listener inside you who used to translate everything they said into a request you would meet before they finished asking. That listener has gone down the hallway and not come back. This is the threshold, not the chapter itself. The threshold before it. I observed this many times in those who came to me at midlife. They did not say I am about to begin a new chapter. They said something I cannot name has gone out of me and I am afraid I have lost something essential. They did not understand yet that what had gone out of them was not essential at all. It was the function that had taken the place of the essential. It was the reflex that had been worn into them so deeply that for years they had mistaken it for their nature. When the reflex fell away, they believed they had fallen away with it. They had not. They had simply become visible to themselves for the first time in decades. You are at this place now or near it. The signs are small but unmistakable. Conversations end with a faint sense that you said less than you used to. Old friends seem to be addressing someone slightly behind you. Tasks that once activated immediate responsiveness now sit in front of you unanswered while you watch yourself not answer. There is no drama in any of this. That is what makes it strange. The collapse of the old empathic life does not announce itself. It does not slam doors. It does not stage a departure. It simply withdraws the sap from the tree. And the tree for a season looks as it did until the leaves do not return on the old schedule. The water has darkened. That is the closest you can come to describing it. The inner pool where you used to dip and bring up the precise emotional response is no longer reflective in the same way. You can still go to it. You can still lower yourself in, but what was once a clear surface is now something deeper and less obliging. The reference, lection comes back slower. Sometimes the reflection does not come back at all, and you stand at the edge of your own interior with a kind of patience that is new to you. You are no longer in a hurry to retrieve a feeling that is acceptable to others. You are willing to wait until what is actually there has time to arrive. This patience is unfamiliar. You may even mistake it for indifference. It is not indifference. Indifference is the absence of feeling. What you are inside now is the presence of feeling that has not yet been packaged for delivery. The packaging line is closed. The feeling is still moving, but it is moving for itself, in its own time, and not toward the recipient who used to wait for it. This is the corridor. This is what always happens before the chapter. The empath does not yet know how to enter. It is here in this corridor that the shadow begins to come close. I have called this the necessary darkness. The phrase is imperfect, but I have used it because there is no neutral word for what occurs in the psyche when the figure that was carrying everyone, including yourself, finally sets the load down. The load does not vanish. It is still in the room, but now you can see it. You can see what was being carried. You can see the shape of the carrying, and perhaps for the first time you can see who placed the load there, and how long ago, and by what unspoken contract you took it on. The empath who is approaching their best chapter is not approaching it as a reward. They are approaching it as a consequence, the consequence of having stopped doing the thing that prevented the chapter from beginning. There is no other way through this. The new chapter cannot open while the old function is still running, and the old function will not stop running on its own. Not because of insight, not because of decision, not because of the many times you told yourself you would change. It stops running because somewhere in the depths the psyche has decided that the cost, T, has finally exceeded the return. The decision was not announced. It was simply enacted. What you are now experiencing is the long aftermath of that quiet enactment. You may in this corridor feel a strange grief. It will not match anything you have read about grief. It is not for a person. It is not for a relationship. It is not even exactly for the past. It is grief for the version of you who believed she had to be that fluent, that quick, that available, that legible. That version did not survive the corridor. She was not killed. She was outgrown. But there is a long moment in which the body which loved her registers her absence and does not yet know how to fill the room without her. I have seen this grief move through patients in waves they could not predict. They would arrive composed. They would speak about their week with clarity, and then at some unimportant moment, the rinsing of a cup, the sound of a closing door, the grief would pass through them and they would lower their faces and say, "I did not know I was mourning her, but I think I have been mourning her for a long time." You are mourning her now, the empath who absorbed, the empath who anticipated, the empath who arrived early at every emotional appointment and stayed late to make sure everyone left feeling met. She is not gone. She is finished. There is a difference. Gone implies absence. Finished implies completion. The work she came to do has been done. The role she came to play has run its full length. And what comes next does not require her, because what comes next is not another role. But you are not yet there. You are still in the corridor. And in the corridor something else is preparing to step forward. Not in the inner room, but at the edge of it, where the shadow has been waiting a long time to be allowed in. The shadow that has been waiting at the edge of the room is not what you were taught to fear. You were taught the shadow was something monstrous, something dangerous, something that would hurt the people you love if you let it speak. That was the first lie of your training, and it was a thorough lie, because it was delivered to you by the very people who needed you to keep the shadow silent. What is actually waiting there is not monstrous. It is the part of you that was sent away early, before it had a chance to learn its full name. It is the part that wanted to refuse. The part that wanted to say, "This is not mine to carry." The part that wanted to ask at 6, at 9, at 14, "Why am I always the one who feels what they will not feel?" That part was not received. It was treated as a difficulty, an inconvenience, an interruption to the family's emotional weather. So it stepped back behind the door, and it stayed there, and it watched for decades perhaps. And in the corridor you are in now, it is no longer watching from behind the door. It is at the door, and the door is the same door that was closed against it long ago. Only now the latch is on the inside, and the inside, it is you. You may feel anger arriving for the first time without apology. This is what disturbs the people around you most. Not the anger itself, they have seen anger before. What disturbs them is anger without the immediate softening. Anger without the explanation. Anger that does not announce itself as a misunderstanding to be cleared up. They wait for the apology that used to come behind the anger, the apology that was already half formed before the anger had finished speaking. The apology does not come. They look at you and find a face that is not negotiating. And they do not know how to read this face because they have never seen it before. It is your face, but it is your face without the second face that used to sit on top of it. I observed again and again in my patients that this is the moment they were most likely to be misnamed. The people in their lives, sometimes the people closest to them, would say she has changed. She has become cold. Something is wrong with her now. The change was real. The coldness was not. What had ended was the constant warming of the room from one side. The temperature of the room was returning to what it had always been. The patient had simply stopped supplying the heat that everyone had grown accustomed to mistaking for the climate itself, and when the heat stopped, Those around them said the room had grown cold because they had no other word for the absence of what they had not known they were receiving. You will be misnamed in this corridor. There is no avoiding it. The names that arrive will not be accurate, and they will not be retracted. Selfish, distant, different, hard. These words will be placed near you, and you will not be able to argue with them, because the people speaking them are not in fact asking a question. They are reporting a sensation. They are sensing the withdrawal of a service they did not know was a service. They are sensing the closing of a door they did not know they had been walking through. Door has in fact closed not against them but toward yourself. The inner door that used to swing open the moment another person needed you, that door is now operating on a slower mechanism. Sometimes it does not open at all. Sometimes it opens partway and you stand at the threshold and listen and decide. The deciding is new. It has the texture of something a child once tried to do and was not allowed to finish. Now the child is finishing it. The child is at the door, and the child has the ledge. This is what the shadow brings. Not violence, not destruction. The simple act of refusal that was forbidden in the original house. The refusal arrives quietly. It does not need to shout. It has been waiting too long to shout. It speaks in the small spaces between your breaths. Now. And you recognize it as your own voice as it sounded before it was taught how to soften. I once treated a woman who dreamed, over a period of nearly 6 months, of the same hallway. In her dream, she was walking down a long corridor lined with doors. Each door was familiar to her. Behind each door was a person she had loved, was related to, had served. The doors were closed but not locked, and through each one she could hear the muffled sound of that person speaking, sometimes asking for her, sometimes simply talking as if she were already in the room with them. In the dream, she walked past each door without opening it. She felt no cruelty as she walked. She felt no urgency. She told me, as though the corridor itself was a kind of water she was finally allowed to wade through without rushing. At the end of the corridor was a single door that was not familiar to her. It was smaller than the others. It was made of a wood she did not recognize. She would always reach this door at the moment of waking. She never opened it in the dream. But she told me in the consulting room that for the first time in her life, she did not feel afraid of what was behind it. She said, "I think it is mine." She was correct. The unfamiliar door is always the one that is finally yours. The familiar doors, the ones lined with the voices of those who have known you, are the doors of the life that has been calling you back through obligation. The unfamiliar door is the door that does not know your name yet, because you have not yet stood in front of it long enough for it to learn. That door is the entrance to what others will later call your best chapter. Though by the time you walk through it, the phrase will sound foreign to you. You will not call it that. You will call it simply the place I went when I was finished with the corridor. But you are not at that door yet. You are still in the corridor, and the corridor is doing its work, which is the work of teaching you to walk past what is calling you. This is the most difficult education the empath ever receives. Not the education of how to feel you learned that early too well. The education of how not to answer. Education of how to hear the voice through the door and remain in the corridor. The education of how to let the call go past you and not turn. Each unanswered call is a small completion. You will not feel triumphant when it happens. You will feel a strange, low, almost metallic sensation in the chest, as though something is settling that was never allowed to settle before. That sensation is the boundary becoming structure. It is not a decision. It is a deposit. Each time the old reflex does not come, the structure of you becomes slightly more solid. A spine forms where there used to be a corridor. The corridor is becoming something else, slowly, by way of the very steps you are taking through it. What is happening in the language I have used elsewhere is the integration of what was rejected. The shadow is not being conquered. It is being received. It is being given a chair in the inner room. The room that until now was reserved for guests. The shadow was never a guest. It was a resident who had been sent to sleep on the floor for 40 years. Now it is being given the chair. And once the shadow has the chair, the room becomes something it was never able to be while the shadow was on the floor. The room becomes inhabited. You are in the early days of this rearrangement. The chair has not yet been pulled fully out. The shadow is standing near it. The light in the room has changed because there is now a presence in it that was not visible before. Those outside the room, looking in through whatever windows they have access to, see a figure they do not recognize. They see two figures, perhaps, where they used to see one. They are not wrong. There are two now in the room that was supposed to contain only the obliging one. And the obliging one is not in charge of the conversation anymore. This is what always happens before the chapter that comes next. The room must be reoccupied before the chapter can begin. The shadow must take the chair. The hallway must be walked. The water must be allowed to darken until the surface stops returning the face you used to wear for others. None of this is reversible. None of this is being done to you. It is being done by the part of you that has at last stopped asking permission. There is a particular quality to time inside this corridor that I want to name, because the people who pass through it without naming it often believe something has gone wrong with them. Time slows not in the pleasant way of a long afternoon, but in a heavier way. Days arrive with a weight that the previous version of you would have rushed to lighten by being useful. Now the days arrive, and you sit with their weight, and the weight does not lift, because you are no longer running the small, constant errands of emotional service that used to break each day into manageable pieces. The day is whole, and a whole day for the empath who has just stopped distributing herself across other people's hours is a strange thing to inhabit. You may notice that you are doing less, and that the doing less is not restful. This is one of the cruel features of the corridor. The labor has stopped, but the rest has not yet arrived. There is an interval between the two, and it can last longer than you expect. The body, which spent decades operating in a low, continuous state of readiness for someone else's emotional weather, does not know how to release that readiness on command. It releases it the way a long-held breath is released unevenly, in pieces, with small returns of the old tension that surprise you when they come back. You will sit down to do nothing and find yourself half an hour later listening for a sound in the house that is not there. The listening is old. The body has not yet been told that no one is coming who needs to be heard. I observed this in my patients with a precision that came to feel almost predictable. In the first weeks of the corridor, they would describe a tiredness that did not respond to sleep, would sleep and wake, and the tiredness would still be there, sitting at the edge of the bed. They would ask me what was wrong with their bodies. There was nothing wrong with their bodies. Their bodies were finally allowed to register the exhaustion that had been postponed for years, sometimes decades. The exhaustion had been waiting in line. It was at last being shown to a chair, and the chair was their actual life, the life that had been running underneath the function, the life that had been kept thin so that the function could be thick.